Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kat Del Grosso. I work for College Ave Student Loans, and I'm the co-chair of the Financial Wellness Education Committee in MASFA. Joined by some other folks from the Financial Wellness Committee this morning. Natasha Munoz, I've got Lisa Talbot, Jen Darcy, Sarah Bergeron is my co-chair. Looking around the room here for the rest of our folks who are on the committee, and I'm sure more will be joining us this morning. So we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available to you as well, Jane.
Thank you.
And we are going to basically, we'll have everybody on mute, but this is actually set up as a Zoom meeting so that you are able to feel free to share your video, feel free to enter some things into the chat, and then we can make sure to have this as more of a conversation than Jane and Natasha talking at us. It's certainly going to, she's welcoming conversation here. So feel free to put things in chat and I'll be monitoring that. And then other than that, I think that's it for housekeeping. So I will turn this over to Natasha and take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Kat, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So for those who might not know me, my name is Natasha Munoz, and I work in the MBA Financial Aid Office at the Harvard Business School. Some of the work that I do in the Financial Aid Office is around financial wellness programming for students. We started doing this work I was going to say more than 5 years ago. We started in person, and then with the pandemic, we started offering these sessions virtual, and also we also do one-on-one sessions for students to meet with a financial planner. When doing these sessions, some of the feedback that I got from the financial planner that we also currently work with was being able to better answer some of the questions from international students. He felt that he was in a position to answer and help these students if they were planning to stay in the US after graduation. But there were situations where he couldn't provide much, assistance based on the unique circumstances if they were planning to move back to the home country after graduation. So based on that feedback, I started looking around. I also participated in some of the sessions that the Harvard University Employees Credit Unions offer to members, including staff members, students. And I listened to one of Jane's sessions for the Harvard University Employees Credit Union. So that's how I got in contact with her and emailed her and sort of share some of my thoughts and feedback about how we could best support international students, because we found ourselves in a situation where one size does not fit all, and international students do stress a lot about money, and sometimes the resources are very limited when they're here in the US. So with that, I just want to share maybe a little bit in general, some of the work that we're doing. Something positive that I want to say in this particular year from our international students, they are really engaged in this session. So on March 1st, we had a session about financial planning and tax implications for international students. We had over 90 students register, and like Jane just shared, that over 60 students joined the session. The session was recorded for students, and I got emails. I kept getting emails about students like that, for a copy of the presentation and a link for the recorded, which we have available for them, and the continuous one-on-ones. So something that we're hoping to do is, based on some of the feedback that we got, is trying to help students on the pre-planning part. Like, you're admitted, you come in and you're going to enroll this fall. Let us help you figure out your finances and some of this planning before you come to school. With that, I just want to then start with a quick introduction about Jane, and then I'll turn it to Jane so she can talk a little bit about disclaimers. So if you want to support your international students on the U.S. educational journey by simplifying the U.S. complex financial system, then you are in the right place. Jane Meehan is a certified financial planner and is a U.S.-based advisor who started as an international student on an F1 visa. And she now works with foreign-born families via her registered investment firm. It's called Elgon Financial Advisors. Jane is a certified financial professional with a master's degree in information technology from WPI. And her number one goal today is to give us all a framework and how we can use that we can use for our international students as they navigate the U.S. Financial system as an international student. Thank you, Jane. Just take it away.
Thank you. It's been an awesome partnership with Natasha. And what I always say is I wish I had the information that I'm providing when I started out. And so I'm going to tell you a 30 seconds quick story of why I do what I do. I came to the US to go to school as an international student, so F1 student. And my parents really sent me to the US, like a lot of parents do from other countries, to pursue my version of the American dream. And so they bought me a one-way ticket. It's not a sad story. Waved bye-bye to me and said, okay, Jen, see you later. Go pursue your American dream. And indeed, I did. I landed in Boston, and now I live in Austin. I went to school at Worcester State and WPI. You're familiar with those two schools, and went through the whole journey of being an immigrant student. And, you know, about the OPT, the visas. I finally got an H-1B visa. I had a company that hired me. And when I went to this job, it was great. And the first thing the HR person said to me is, hey, Jane, you need to sign up for your 401k. And I remember saying, and what is that? And she goes, oh, this is how you build your American dream. This is how you save for retirement. In other words, this is how you grow rich. Obviously, that's a whole different story. But the thing I remember is this sense of desperation and fear, because I had no idea what a 401k was. I had no idea how to go about investing and selecting whatever funds to put into. And it just felt like after all this time, I've been given the opportunity and I'm not going to make it, which is really sad when you think about it. Fast forward a couple of years, it's the reason I decided to become the guide that I would have wanted to have, not only as an international student, but also as a foreign-born person working in the US. And this is why I ended up starting Elgon Financial Advisors. And I work with people who are foreign-born, a lot of folks in tech, people on work visas, and literally walk them through their own financial and immigration journey as we deal with finances. And so my thing is, I want to help as many international students as I can and give them the information they desperately need just based on some of the questions that I see coming through. So thank you. Before we start, I have to put out what we call a disclaimer, and everything we're going to talk about is really for education and for education purposes only. This should not be considered legal, personal, or financial advice. It's really, really important that we put out this disclaimer simply because I don't know your specific individual situation, so I cannot really give you specific advice. And one thing Natasha and I talk about, and I've explained this to the school and they're really happy about this, is I always provide this disclaimer, and I'm usually pretty happy to word it exactly the way they want us to word it. Again, we want to make sure that people understand this is for general information only. It's education. If you need legal specific tax advice, then that's a whole different session. And with that, I'll pass it back to Natasha.
Yes, thank you, Jane. And I thought it was important to touch base about that because we have tax implications and the role that we are in the financial aid office. We don't want to be in the position, we are not allowed to provide tax advice. So if we want to make sure, you know, sometimes students, because they don't know, they're not familiar with the US tax system, and they really in a way wants us to tell them what to do, but here's some resources. And if it then the next step, if you feel like you need a tax legal advice or talk to a tax professional, here are some additional resources.
Right.
So maybe next we want to sort of start by talking about the challenges and also financial planning for international students. And why it's so important to talk about financial planning. And I think I want to use an example of with a student that I had this week. He's an international student. He's in a 5-year joint degree student. And I met with him because he doesn't have any room within his budget for additional loan eligibility. But as an international student, having the opportunity for me to be intentional and say, I could just say, you don't have any additional room within your budget. There is nothing else we can do. I'd say, do you want to stop by and maybe we can meet and see what we can do? I don't want to make any promises, but maybe having a conversations, we can navigate some additional resources. And then he told me, as an international student, he comes from a country where he only gets an F1 for a year. It means that in a 5-year, he has to go to his home country 5 times to reapply for a student visa. So he has to pay the visa application, he has to pay airfare, which is over $2,000. And I know each school is different in terms of what we can do in terms of professional adjustment. But at least I said, for the year that you're here, let's see what we can do. And we also talk about maybe you purchase a laptop for school. Can we include that in the cost of attendance for additional loan eligibility? So the end of the story was, it was helpful for me to hear that, because I believe, you know, our regular MBA students typically get a 2-year visa. So this is an expense for many students, but it's a one-time expense. This is a student that has to go through this process 5 times, and he's from a lower socioeconomic background. So I just wanted to share that some of the challenges we might find with our students. And based on that, I have some questions that I want to ask Jane. And if everyone else have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. Kat is also going to help me to monitor the chat for questions. So Jane, the first question I have for you is, reflecting on your own experience as an international student in the US, what can you share about your general awareness of financial wellness and planning? Can you also include or touch base on the cultural considerations of financial wellness?
Okay, so when I think about, first of all, financial wellness, it's a relative measure of, how well a person manages their financial life. So really it comes down to the idea of your money habits, you know, how you set goals and how you go about achieving them. And the whole idea is, if your finances are in order, then your overall quality of life is obviously better for you, right? So being in control and knowing what's happening is really key to financial wellness. Now, I knew how to budget because my parents had taught me how to budget. But the one thing they did not teach me was how the US financial system works. Obviously, they could not, because they were not in that system. And so I come in, I know how to budget. They're very keen about making sure we work for a living. I was ready to work, but not knowing even simple things like the language sounded alien, even though we're all speaking English. I'd go to the bank and they talk to me about opening a checking account. I have no idea what that is. Where I come from, and we speak English, we call that a current account. They'll talk to me about insurance. We call it a cover. Now I kind of have like a little dictionary of matching up this terminology. And so the students, we find ourselves in a situation where we may have the money, but we're doing poorly because we don't understand how it works. We don't understand the systems that are used. And then you find it's completely the things that we expected to do are very different. Last week, I spoke to a student who's, I think from India, and he kept talking about, I was so shocked when my friends took me out and they said I had to tip. Why do I have to tip? And he kept going on and on and on about the tip. And then he said to me, at some point, I ended up getting a job working as a waiter. And when I realized how much they were paid, I now understand. So not understanding those little things, even though you have the money, you know how to budget, really does make a big difference in how we look at financial wellness. And so I think it's always very important anytime you're working with international students, you try and look at things through their eyes. When they say something, try and probe a little bit deeper just to understand where they're coming from. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Jane. And following question that we have for you is, what are the main issues that students reach out to you for?
Without fail, the number one issue I get is taxation. And part of it is because students have had, and it's true, but nobody really tells them how to go about filing taxes. So I get a ton, and I have a whole list of questions that I've seen all to do with taxes. How do I do taxes? What do I report? What tax form should I use? If I made, I only made so much, what do I do with it? And so I walk them through. First of all, I explain, yes, you must file taxes. That's the first thing. If you have $1, and I said, and it's literally $1 of income, then you do need to file federal taxes. The difference is when you file taxes, you use 1040 NR, you're non-resident. And I'll walk them through how they figure out whether to use that form or not. By default, most of the students on F1 visa end up having to use that form. So that's a key question that I get. The other one around that is, oh, I got a scholarship. Do I need to report it? And yes, outside of tuition, they do need to include it. Or I have this. What's the other one that I get a lot of? Tuition. Is there anything we can do with that? I'm sorry, you can't. You can't really include that when you're doing taxes as an international student. The other one. Oh, and one more thing. I think a lot of the schools do provide software that the students can use, SpringTax. And so, sorry, somebody just put in a comment. We'll look at it later. If the schools provide SpringTax, I send them to SpringTax because that does help you file taxes as a non-resident, as a US non-resident. And they do have great support. The other one that I tend to see a lot of is cash flow and budget. What happens is when they come in, and this is some of what Natasha and I will be talking to the students before they come in, the schools do a great job of providing budgets and saying this is what you can expect to spend. But what I find is there's a whole bunch of other things that the schools don't include. One of them is like your summer stuff, going places. Students like to travel. That's never included. Things like there's something I call a taste of home, where you find as an international student, you end up meeting up students from your country and you kind of want to hang out with them. You need to account for that. So I do get a lot of questions around, I came in with this money, but now I don't think I have enough. What do I do? So if we can catch them before they get here, so at least they have an understanding of what they can expect to spend, I think that would be very helpful. Those are probably the two top questions that I see. There's a lot more other questions, but those are probably the top ones that I see constantly.
So Jane, the comment that was in chat is from Michael Silvernail. A couple of areas where I can struggle providing advice is in areas of tax treaties and currency restrictions from some countries. Yeah. Are you able to comment on that for us?
Yeah, and I completely understand. So one of the things that I do, and now that you've asked the question, we'll go there when it comes to filing taxes as a non-resident. If there's a tax treaty between the US and your home country, you end up maybe not having to pay as much. It kind of modifies what you end up paying. And so like one of the things I'll do with Natasha before we start the session is to say, can you tell me what countries these students are coming from? And I actually go out and look at a bunch of those tax treaties. There's probably like 70 or 80 countries that have tax treaties with the US. Really, the only way to talk to them is to kind of go through some of that and see if there's anything you can use the modification for. But at a high level, a tax treaty is what we call double tax avoidance treaty. So you can talk to them at that level, and then if need be, if you have to, then you can go down to the lower country. I mean, to the specifics of that country. And then the currency restrictions, what do you have in mind, Michael, when you say currency restrictions?
Well, what we experience is we have students who are from certain countries like Nigeria, where they're letting us know that they're prevented from transferring funds out of the country in order to. So we have some hardship requests we're dealing with right now for a student who says they can't pay the rent because they haven't been able to actually transfer the funds out.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So I was just wondering, in this particular case, we directed them to talk to our international office to see if they could provide advice, and then suggested they talk to their embassy to see if they had any advice on ways to do it. But I was wondering if you had any kind of advice on how we can help students, work with their banking entity in their home country to allow them to transfer the funds they need.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially when they already have the money. Now, one of the systems I recommend to even all my clients is you may be familiar with Wise. That seems to work pretty well for transferring money back and forth. But if there are restrictions from the country, I think the approach you're taking, even reaching out to the embassy, is probably not a bad idea. But that's a very specific question. I'll be more than happy if you reach out to me to see if I can find some more resources for you. I'm happy to do that, because that's pretty specific.
Yeah, it comes up fairly commonly in our students in certain countries. So thank you.
Okay. And I think this is where now we're talking about look at everything through the students' eyes. So that's great, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we have students from Argentina and Venezuela, and I think they have the same issue that Michael is telling us. So they have a hard time, being able to bring money so they can pay for rent and things like that.
Would it be helpful if you had them start transferring money ahead of time? So if they're only allowed to bring in a little bit at a time, at least it will be here before they get here? Just a thought. Okay,
Yeah.
Zimbabwe.
Yes. I mean, to be honest, it's like that. Like, I don't even know how it works. I know that when they tried, like I was helping a student from Argentina last year, and it was like a long process. It's like he needed to collect a lot of paperwork and wait just for them to tell them yes or no. And then it was so even like maybe doing like a small transfers, I don't even know if that's an option. So, but I don't know, maybe something for us to look into, and how maybe having better understand the process, but having resources that will be, I think, really helpful.
Yeah, okay. And I'm definitely going to add those two to my list to look into as well. But yeah, sorry, go on.
No, thank you. This is all great. Okay, so in the next question we have is, what financial steps do international students need to consider during their first year on a student visa in the US?
So the first thing I say to students when I talk to them is we need a mind shift change. I want them to accept that it's going to be tricky because it's going to be different. And so I want them to be students, to be prepared to learn. There are times you speak to people and folks keep talking about, and I know I've done it. Oh, back home, this is how we did it. Why do I have to do blah, 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 right? So I talk to them a lot about it's different. It's a different system. Let's understand the rules. Let's figure out what you need to do. So please be prepared to be a student. So that's always like the first thing, a mind shift change. And then I'll talk to them a lot about getting a handle on their budget. which ideally they should do before they come to the US. So when Natasha and I have done some of these sessions, she's given me a breakdown of the budget that they share with the students, and we'll go through it and say, oh, we didn't include this, we didn't include this. So I'll talk to the students about that. I'll talk to them about health insurance, because that's one thing that is very different about the US compared to a lot of countries, especially if they come from a country where there's national health insurance. And I know most schools typically will make the students get health insurance, but I'll talk to them about how important this is and the fact that not having insurance could really ruin you. It would only take one incident or one accident. And then we'll talk a lot about opening a bank account, and we'll go into different options. There's all kinds of different places to do this. Now, I typically would suggest they go to a credit union. That seems to be the easiest way of doing this. But we do have other options like, international banks, branches, that type of thing. But really opening a bank account and how you go about doing it. And then I do have in my list, figure out the most efficient way to get money sent to them from their home country. That's key that we figure that out as soon as possible. So like I said, WISE is one option, but obviously it all depends on on the country they're coming from. And then I'll also talk to them about filing taxes and let them understand they do have filing requirements. One thing I do want to point out is every year, every international student needs to file something. If they have some type of income that needs to be reported, which like I said is $1 in federal income, then they need to do the 1040 NR. If they don't, then they need to file Form 8843, which is really a form that allows you to claim to be a non-resident. The reason being, as an F1 student, you have 5 calendar years where you have to file as a non-resident. And anybody that files as a non-resident needs to file these forms. So I talked to them about every year you have to file one of two things. You have to file one thing or two things. 1040 NR with your 8843. And if you don't have taxes, you still need to file the 8843 form. And they're always, the surprises I get is nobody told me this. Like, I understand it's just an informational form. And like I said, Sprintax is a great software to use for that. And then there'll be other things we'll talk about because that's only the first year.
Great. Thank you, Jane. Now we talk about taxes. My next questions was whether or not international students needed to file a tax return, but yes, regardless of whether or not even this form for informational purposes, because sometimes due to the financial aid, financial application process for international students, when we request income verifications, international students will upload that documentation and say, well, is not income in the US, but if you earn any income prior coming to school, we need proof of income for that time before enrolling into the MBA program. So thank you for that information. Are scholarships taxable for international students?
Yes, outside of tuition. So if you get a US scholarship that covers room, board, anything else outside of tuition, then that is taxable and that would need to be included as part of filing taxes. Now, I do tell them if they got a scholarship from outside the country, because they're filing as non-residents at this point, the US doesn't really care about income outside of the US. And the reason I explain this, because if you're filing taxes as a US resident, and we probably, I don't know if you're familiar with this, the US taxes you on worldwide income. So they'll be very interested in what you made over there, whatever that is. But as long as you're filing taxes as a non-resident, you don't need to include income and assets and anything overseas. But if you have a US scholarship and it's more than tuition, then that does need to be included.
Thank you, Jane. And if an international student plans to stay in the US after graduation, what financial considerations should these students consider?
So we talk a lot about the fact, being a resident versus non-resident, and this is for tax purposes, right? So if they're planning on staying in the US after graduation, hopefully, they'll get an H-1B visa. Obviously, they need a work visa or OPT visa. I guess the OPT visa is going to be the first one. If they get an OPT visa for tax purposes is treated the same way as an F1 visa. So they still have to do the 5 calendar years before they have to file taxes as a US person or as a US resident. If they're going to be on the H-1B visa, then they need to start filing taxes as a US person. So the things I talk to them a lot about is once you become a US tax resident, the US is very, very interested in your overseas assets. And so we have to bring everything we own into a tax filing. And students, folks are usually like, but it's what the rule is. So what I say to folks is let's understand what the requirements are. So if you have a bank account overseas, you have a business that's been making money, we need to start reporting on that. So the things I talk to them about is before we cross that bridge, you have some time where if you don't want to be including those assets in your taxes in the US, you have an opportunity to kind of make some changes if you like, do some pre-planning. A good example that I like to use is where you have somebody here, call them John, they have family overseas, and to make it easier, the family adds them to the family joint account. And now we have something like 100K in this account. When it comes to filing taxes in the US, if John is filing as a US resident, he won't need to report this family joint account. It's something called an FBAR form. So these are the things I really talk to them about. I also talk to them about evaluating, whether they plan on staying here long term or is it just for a short time. And if you're going to be in the US for just a short time, I talk about trying to kind of not tie your finances too much into the US system. But if you're going to be here for the long term, okay, then let's take advantage of what the US has to offer. So I'll also talk to them about something called a PFIC, being very careful what they invest in their home countries, because some of those are taxed punitively. That's probably the only way to describe some of it. So it's really now bringing your whole investments into the system. I think that's the thing. And then of course, there'll be other things I want to talk to them about, things like if they really want to stay in the US and their H-1B visas, some of the things they need to be doing about, their careers to make sure they can keep their jobs, getting companies to really help them as far as, filing a green card for them, that type of thing. So if you get a company that says, yeah, we may do it, but we may not do it, you probably want to be looking at a new company, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in talking about investments, can international students invest in the US as an F1 student?
Yeah, the good thing or the beauty about the US is absolutely, you can invest in the US. The question is, should they be investing in the US, and what type of accounts should they be investing in? So the other question I get asked a lot, which is interesting, I think because everybody has heard about a Roth IRA, I get a ton of questions about, oh, I'm an F1 student, can I invest in a Roth IRA? Or whatever, on some visa, can I invest in the Roth IRA? And what I have to explain is a Roth IRA, it's a great account, you invest in it after taxes, but you have to have earned income, and the earned income has to be earned in the US. So you have to have like W-2 income to be able to invest in that account. So I'll talk to them about, here's some of the places where they can invest. You got brokerage accounts, but a big part of that is how the earnings or the capital gains or everything is treated when it comes to taxes. So as an example, if you have a brokerage account and you have dividends and interest, the US will tax you at 30% unless there's a tax treaty to kind of modify that. So this is now where we start getting into more specifics of what country are you coming from? How long are you going to be there? But the general answer, yeah, anybody can invest in the US market. Does that make sense? Okay.
That's all the questions I had for Jane, based on some of the questions the students submit for her session. I know there right now we may have a concern about how to navigate a student loan repayment as an international student, or what can I do as an international student if at my job, let's say I'm graduating this year and my job offer gets delayed. So I don't know if you have any general advice in how, I don't know, we can support the students, or the students can find resources, because I find that can be a common theme for the graduating class.
So there's a company up until last year, they used to give international students, pretty much anybody on or even on work visas, loans, but they just got bought. So I'm looking for a new resource that I can send to people. This company, they used to pride themselves on, you could land at the airport, apply for a loan, and by the time you get to your apartment, the money is already in your account, because they're helping you build credit, which is the other thing we talk about. So we have to look for some new resources as far as, you know, companies or organizations that are willing to give loans to international students. It may come down to having somebody guarantee that loan, and that's always a tough one, because they want a US citizen or a permanent resident to be able to do that. So we have to look for some new resources for sure, and it's on my list of things I'm investigating, because I don't want to send you to something that's not working anymore. But yeah, and then there's always the idea of credit cards, but I try and, if they're able to get them, we have a whole different conversation on, you know, using credit cards and how they should be thinking about it.
And some things I also do with international students, that because our international students, most of them do have a loan option without a U.S. citizen as a co-signer through the Harvard University Employees Credit Union. So as we're hearing these concerns, you know, we tell them you're going to have a 6-month grace period, but keep in touch with your loan servicer. If it comes November, you are in that situation, you're unable to make payment, talk to them. Don't wait until until that date or after. Yeah, start that conversation. So, and I think it's going back to this conversation that as we think about moving forward, is helping them with a pre-planning plan. It's like, if it is in your mind, this is a good time to start thinking about that, reaching out to them so you're prepared. If you're able to start making payments in November, that's great. But if you're not, you know what to do and you know who to contact.
And I do find a few of them, if we manage to have the conversation ahead of time, they may have options actually to get loans from their home country, which is why I think it's now so important we talk to them before we get here, and we tell them what to expect and even how long it would take to get jobs, that kind of thing. So if you give them that info upfront, it seems a little bit easier to get scholarships and loans from their home country, which I absolutely recommend to them. And then I don't know at what point you suggest, I always suggest they start trying to get like the OPT visa as far ahead as they can, whether they're going to use it or not, because the OPT visa is not really tied to a specific job compared to, let's say, an H-1B visa, which is tied to an employer. So I always say to them, you may not use it or not, but if you think you might, let's go ahead and get that, so there's no gap between when you finish school and when you can start working. So I think that's important for them to do. And then, of course, it's talking to them a lot about they've made it here, which I always start by congratulating them. It's like, it's a big deal. You've made it. You've been admitted to the school. So that's something to be proud of. There's a strength in being an immigrant. Let's take advantage of that and think about how else we can be resourceful when it comes to some of these things. So
Yes.
Jane, we had a question in the chat.
Mhm.
Are scholarships taxable if they are more than tuition or tuition and fees? Can you clarify that?
Yes, anything over tuition and fees is taxable. So if you're using it for room board, for example, that will be taxable.
So,
Or even stipend, sorry.
oh, I'm sorry. So it's more than tuition or more than tuition and fees, basically?
Correct.
More than tuition and fees.
What do you consider to be fees? Maybe is a question.
Like if you have, I don't know, Monica, if you were referring to like the health insurance fees or.
Yeah, like our
sort of
school
equipment.
has student fees and it just covers them going to the health insurance place on campus. Technology fees, it's all lumped into one fee. And it's like $800 on top of our tuition
Okay,
charges
okay.
per year.
Yeah, I believe that will be taxable, but you know what, Monica, I will confirm that specific number for you. I know it's usually they'll say anything outside of tuition, but I will confirm if you
Okay,
call it a
thank
fee.
you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And Jane, you were mentioning, I think you said, was it WISE earlier, WISE?
Mhm,
Is it WISE.com?
Correct, yeah,
okay.
Wise.
Yeah.
I find that to be a good company for doing money transfers. From,
just put it
yeah,
in the
you
chat,
got it,
yeah.
thank you, yeah, money transfers from the US or from their country. But you'll also find different countries also have different ways of transferring money. But this is one I'll talk a lot about, coming from the US. So they do have other systems they can use, but yeah, that's a good one.
Okay.
Does anybody need the link for the tax treaties? Because we can share that too. Michael, you need that?
No, I had a question or a comment. So.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Michael.
Okay, didn't want to jump
thanks.
in. So just a couple of quick comments, and this is sort of more a question, I guess, for the group as a whole, which is, or one thing we do is we require for visa certification that they put their funds in a U.S. bank in U.S. dollars in order to qualify for a visa, because we worry about currency fluctuations and whether or not they will have immediate access to those funds. I was wondering if that was something that other schools tended to do as well, or whether or not some schools were more relaxed about the where the accounts were being held when it comes to visa funding.
I can share what we do at the business school, since I'm also familiar with the process to issue I-20s or DS 2019 with international students. So one is that they can use financial aid as a source of funds. When we talk about financial aid, they can use any scholarship eligibility that they have, and also for international student, a loan, assuming that they qualify for the loan with the Harvard University Employees Credit Union. If there is a gap, then a student needs to provide sources of personal funds, but we do not ask them for the funds to be in the US. But it is their responsibility to make sure that they transfer the funds and the funds are available to them to pay for school and all their expenses.
So when I first came to the US many years ago, my parents, we ended up sending the money directly to the school. And again, this is many years ago. Looking back, I'm so glad they did that. Because then I wasn't tempted to take it out and use it for something else, if that makes sense. So I always say, folks now ask me, oh, we're going to send our kids to the US, which we do with the money. I always recommend they send it directly to the school, the money for tuition. So.
And the other question I had, which is going to be a little more esoteric, but so not everyone may be sort of thinking about this, but there's the FAFSA Simplification Act. One of the things that it requires us to do now is to have different cost potential budgets for people who have dependents who are living in on-campus housing. And in our particular case, looking at those costs for those with dependents, that means that we're going to be increasing their living expenses dramatically in their cost of attendance for those with dependents, because it's basically double what it would be for a single individual. And so I'm wondering to what extent people have been thinking about this in light of financial counseling, students who suddenly have their budgets increased substantially from what they originally had as sort of their standard budget when they originally entered, and that sort of thing.
Michael, here at Tufts, we get an easy pass. We don't allow dependents on campus at all. So we just don't have any family housing. So we've moved past that requirement. And then for the visa certification, we don't, in the financial aid office at Tufts, we're not involved at all in the I-20 certification, which is nice for me because I don't have to become an expert in something that I really don't know very much about. I can send them off to the I-Center, but just looking at the website, we don't require the funds to be in a US bank account. And obviously that causes issues. Like we have a student from Sri Lanka who cannot get money out of the country, and so is relying on work study earnings to try to pay bills. So not a great situation for them.
Thanks, Christy.
And do you prioritize international students when it comes to things like work study or jobs on campus? Because that is at least the one thing we know the students can do even while they're on the F1 visa without having to ask for special permission.
I mean, I know where we are at Harvard School of Public Health, there are lots of open positions. We don't specifically prioritize international students over domestic, but there's more positions available than there are students prepared to fill them. So it isn't an issue for students who are interested in working. There's definitely opportunity.
Okay, so maybe that could be something I talk about when they say, where can we get money from, to say, you know, just let them know they can work on campus without having to get a work permit. And they can do that anytime. So they just need to go talk to, I guess it'll be the career, I don't know what you'd call it now, but the center where they can get some of these jobs. Because I think some of that will be helpful and useful for them.
Usually it's like a student employment office, something like that.
Student employment office. Okay, sounds good.
Christy, what was the country that you mentioned, the student who had a hard time getting money out of their country? Which one was that again?
They're in Sri Lanka. So the political unrest has just changed everything for them. We have another student who has done some activism work and cannot return, cannot go to the embassy, cannot interact with their country at all. And so that's obviously posed some big issues for them, and we're trying to see what little scholarship funding the program can offer them, but it's always tough. There are just so many fewer options for international students compared to US citizens and permanent residents with funding.
Okay.
Another category that's incredibly limited is undocumented students, and I really struggle with trying to provide guidance and counseling for undocumented students.
That's a whole other different topic for sure. Yeah, I think so far we've been talking about, students who are here legally, but the undocumented students, that's a different ballgame.
Does anyone have any other questions for Jane that you want to ask?
Did you want to talk about some of what we've been doing?
Yeah, so I think maybe what I want to lastly maybe briefly talk about is about opportunities to move forward, and is like based on what we talked today and based on the feedback that we're getting from students is, yeah, you are admitted to the program, that's great. You have financial aid, that you have the cost of attendance, but I think we talk about this about pre-planning, and that what really means, that 9-month cost of attendance. You're still responsible for applying for student visa, paying for airfare to relocate to the US. If you get an apartment, you need to get furniture. Depending on where you're coming from, you might need winter clothes. So we're hoping to spend some time working with the incoming class so they're more aware about this, like expenses beyond the cost of attendance. We have a lot of international students that support families in the back home. So that's not something that we can just add to the cost of attendance so they can get more financial aid, even in the form of loans. So trying to work on that. In Jane, I know you had some information, feedback, recommendations.
Yeah, so what we've done, we've had a couple webinars specifically, and Natasha and I have been doing them, let's say, for the graduating class or the class that's coming in. And when I do these seminars with her, one of the things I always ask for is, could you give me a list of all the countries where the students are coming from? And that way, you know, I'll be prepared for like any tax treaty kind of questions or just things I may know about the specific countries. The other thing we did for the last one that was very helpful is to literally ask students, let me know what you want to know, send your questions ahead of time. And the amount of questions they sent, I almost had to change my presentation completely just to try and get through, include the issues or the questions they're asking about. So we're now doing a session where we'll just talk about, you know, you're new here, like budgeting and things to be thinking about. And like I mentioned, the career stuff, I think is really important to talk to them about, and the implications of being on the visa. And then we'll do a separate session, which is very tax focused. Again, it's not tax advice, it's giving them tax information where we walk them through how the US determines your tax residency status. And that's always very well received. I think having a formula, this is how I figure out what I am and what that means, and, you know, take that to the end. And then I think the next session we're going to be doing, we actually now decided it makes sense to do it before they get into the country, so we can talk about some of these things, the budgets, what to expect, and what to expect, and, you know, the numbers they should be looking at. The other thing I've been talking to Natasha about, and when the students reach out to me afterwards and I don't have information, I'm very happy to, let's say, provide them with resources of folks, send them to folks, for example, that can help them do the taxes if they can't use PRINTAX. Some of the questions that I've seen, like in the last session, had quite a bit to do with immigration. I'm sure you all know, like an international student is not supposed to work outside unless, you know, they have permission, and the implications of that. And one of the things I ended up doing with some is just saying, you know, you can go talk to immigration folks. So I think providing some of these resources, like here's some maybe immigration people you can talk to if you have specific legal questions, I think will be very helpful. Because one thing I know is when I was going through as an international student, there are things I wouldn't have wanted to go and talk to the international office advice about, and I'll prefer to go talk to folks outside. So I think if you're able to maybe also provide some of those resources, I think it'll be very helpful. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think it's important to provide students like a safe and confidential place where they can have these conversations as well. So that's all I have. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everyone, that joined us today. I don't know if there are any last minute questions, or if we will follow up maybe with some additional information, resources, and also a link for the recording. But I just want to say, everyone, thank you for joining us today. I hope this was
I'm going to put in my email address here. If anybody has questions, feel free to reach out.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, you got
Thank
it.
you so
All
much,
right.
Jane.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
All right,
having me.
great.